Hey folks, let's talk about this box. I made it in secret to propose to my girlfriend and filmed the whole process. Once I was done, I didn't care to edit the footage into a video. But after fishing for compliments on Facebook, I'm ready to go. Let's do this. Let's start by looking at the design. My goals here were to make a box that is thinner in my pocket than the ring is tall, and of course, that displays the ring nicely. What I ended up with, I think, is a box that has two separate mechanisms. There's the hinge at the back here. That's just a piece of this 30 thousandths music wire running through a slot in these bottom two parts. And then when you glue the next layer on top, that gets held into place. And then of course, there's the fun part, which is this flexure in the middle, which I think you can more clearly see on this prototype box that I made. I hadn't figured out the hinge yet, but you've got the flexure and then this slider that when you push forward, kicks the ring up for display. This flexure is held on either end by a strip of this blue nylon fabric. You can't see the one up front, but that's also how it's attached to the slider. And then lastly, there's this mechanism that holds the ring. Hopefully that's pretty straightforward. That gap is narrower than a ring is, so when you push a ring in, it flexes either side. There's two identical ones of these and holds onto it. One other thing to mention that I figured out trial and error, if you're going to design one of these, the bars that make up this flexure have to be the same thickness roughly as the material. So this is the first one I made, which doesn't follow those rules. And when you bend it, you can see it doesn't form a nice arch. Each individual bar or link in this flexure is bending, not twisting. And it's the twisting that we need. So the next one that I made in that same material, the flexure parts are way closer together to be one material thickness thick, and this one bends properly. So these ones are done that way too, but with material that's 2-ply thick to be a little bit sturdier. All right, let's head over to the other room and see how this was made. Welcome to the composites lab, also known as the kitchen floor. Right here, we're going to be making the material to cut the flexure out of that props the ring up. So when we're done, we're hoping to end up with something that looks like this. And so to do that, we've got a stack of little walnut squares cut out. I've already gone ahead and moved them so that they alternate the grain structure every other panel, because when we saturate these with glue, we'll separate them apart in pairs, and having the grain structure alternating like this helps make sure that we'll get even strength and we're less likely to crack along the grain. So we'll start out by weighing out some glue. We'll use about 36 grams all told. I'm using West Systems 105 with the long cure, slow cure hardener. All right, we'll go ahead and transfer this into the vacuum chamber and grab our stack of walnut. What we're going to do is use a magnet to suspend this from the vacuum chamber lid. Now I tried at one point just putting the walnut straight into the epoxy before turning on the vacuum. This seems to work better for getting the wood grain itself full of epoxy. All right, that was pretty good. Sounds like we're getting a pretty high vacuum. So I'll go ahead and drop this in. And then it tends not to fall, so I have a larger magnet here. We'll go ahead and pull that in. Now, another step here that I didn't realize was important is actually to pull the magnets off of the wood, which should have just happened there. It collapsed the bubbles a little, and you see that's important to help get epoxy saturated all the way through the different layers. That happened accidentally the first time I did this, and I didn't realize it was important until I avoided it the next time through, and I ended up with laminate that was dry in the middle. Alright, that's probably good. We'll go ahead and shut this off. Now we've got saturated pieces of wood down in our epoxy. So we'll go ahead and grab our flat surface that we're going to lay these up onto. Just a laser cut piece of MDF with some Ziploc baggy parts over it. We'll pull these out. And now, as I said before, every pair of these will separate, square up, and place onto our flat surface here for curing. Looks like we still have a couple that weren't saturated all the way through. These top ones felt pretty good. Alright, we'll fold this over the top, and then I have this vacuum bag prepared, which is just a Ziploc bag that I've ported some hose into the side of. This newspaper helps to pull a vacuum down evenly over the surface. Having a porous medium like that for the gas to diffuse through helps get even suction. I didn't have time to go buy fittings for this part, so this is a little bit quick and dirty. We're going to cap off the T-junction that would normally go into the vacuum chamber, pull off the air intake filter, and just shove this hose into the ball valve. All right. Alright, with these wrinkles mostly eliminated, I'm going to go grab a pot of warm water to set on here to get this to cure faster. The vacuum pump here coughs out a lot of oil fumes, even with the sour cream container full of old socks on the exhaust, so I don't like running it for very long. So putting hot water on here is going to help these cure faster when they're in ideal conditions. And then after about an hour, I'll replace the hot water with some dead weight, turn off the vacuum, and let these continue to cure until tomorrow. Alright, here's that warm water. We'll throw an old sweatshirt over that to keep it warm for an hour. And I will see you at the next step of the build. It's been a day and a half since we put this under vacuum, so let's take it apart and see what we got. While I open this up, we'll go ahead and switch to a voiceover edit to speed things up a bit. You can see the top two squares here are a bit lighter. That's because they're not completely full of glue. I didn't end up using them, but the bottom ones were fine, so those went down to the laser cutter. Down at the laser cutter, I cut the flexure, which you can see here, but also the ring clamps, some shims, the 4 walnut layers for the box, a couple of sliders to play with, and even the nylon hinges. Then I skipped filming a few steps and checked in after having glued each half of the box together. Before doing this, I had to file off the charred edges that would have ended up inside the box and sand off a corner of the bottom hinge part to give it clearance to rotate. This left me with 2 more corners to sand to give the lid clearance, and after knocking those down, I could spray some clear coat inside each half. Next up was the slider, which was too thick coming off the laser cutter to fit in the slot I made for it, so I had to Dremel it down and then hand sand it flat before giving it its own spray-on coat. Here you can see all the parts of the assembly. Up top are the 2 box halves, then the flexure, slider, and both hinges, along with a small strip of that flexure material to sandwich the nylon against the main flexure. Then there's the 2 ring grippers and a shim to glue onto each one. Next up, gluing. This part was really stressful and the footage gets a bit hairy. The flexure mechanism went together in several steps, starting with gluing on the nylon hinges, one onto the slider and one to the main flexure. Then each one of the ring grippers had a shim glued on the back. The next day, once that had all cured, I lined the walls of the bottom of the box with packing tape so glue wouldn't stick to it. Then I installed the slider with the fabric on its front and the flexure with the fabric sticking off the back. I curled the fabric from the slider over the front of the flexure and then glued on both ring clamps. With that cured, I could glue the box halves together, sandwiching the nylon from the flexure between the two. It's important to sand both sides of this joint because of the spray coat that went on the insides of these parts earlier. Otherwise, the two halves will shear apart when you're trying to sand the front face. Not that I would know. Anyway, coming down the home stretch here, sanding off the front and back faces of the box to get rid of traces of glue, square everything up, and then we can give the box its final shape. That's done by chamfering all the corners with a Dremel, then sanding them round, and giving the whole outside of the box a touch up with sandpaper. After a few rounds of clear coats, we're left with this. All right, I think I'm prepared to call that finished. I don't know much about wood finishing, so I'm sure there's probably ways I could have gotten this to polish up a little nicer, but I think it looks good enough for what I'm after, and it does everything I'm looking for. It's not much bigger than the ring itself. I don't have the real ring, but I glued a ball bearing to a different ring for about the size. And when you open it up, whoops, it should present the ring nicely. Here, I can even tuck this in for you and show you what that'll look like. Ta-da! And it's a nice bonus. I think it's actually, yeah, there we go. Slimmer than the ring itself. So, thanks for watching. Have a good day.